Thank you, Vice Chancellor. We're very grateful that our next speaker has been able to find time in an extremely busy schedule to address our event today. Please welcome Maher Nasser, the Director of the Outreach Division in the United Nations Department of Public Information.
Thank you, Dana. And good morning and welcome to the United Nations. How many of you are here for the first time? Okay, don't make it your last. The United Nations, of course, was created as an organization of member states, and we do recognize that states and governments are the ones who give us the mandates. They give us the resources to do what we are doing around the world. At the same time, we also go by the words of the Charter of the United Nations, which starts with "we the peoples." So it is your organization. In 2015, in September, a historic landmark set of goals, some people call them Sustainable Development Goals, this is the official name that we have to call them by, civil society organizations have given them the name Global Goals, and you see them behind you. And looking at those goals, it's an agenda for what we need to do together. When we say Join Together was an initiative last year, 2 years ago, to promote respect, safety, and dignity, mainly focused on migrants and refugees. But it is also related and is part of the global agenda for 2030. If you look at the global goals, most people will associate them with fighting poverty, eliminating hunger, ensuring access to health, education, gender equality, protecting the environment, saving the oceans, life over land, dealing with climate change, one of the most existential threats that we have. Reducing inequalities is important. Working to improve our urban environments and societies. Working for access to energy and sustainable energy, clean energy, renewable energy. At the same time, we have two goals that are not very well known. Goal number 12, which talks about responsible production and consumption, which is something that is having impact on life on the planet as we know it, and goal number 16, which promotes peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provides access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So within goal 16, we can think of Join Together, together universities, together civil society, together private sector, together governments, together individuals. We need to work together to achieve the ambitions of the global goals. Within that, to ensure that nobody is left behind. Nobody is left behind because they are marginalized in the society. Nobody is left behind because they are a minority. Nobody is left behind because they are migrants or refugees. When we look at the work we do at the United Nations, of course, member states and governments come here and they have lived up to the responsibility by adopting those goals. At the same time, we know that governments face different and political priorities that change. Governments do change, but eventually, and I don't refer to the Sustainable Development Goals as United Nations goals. They are actually all of our goals. They are your goals. They were adopted by world leaders as an agenda for change, as an agenda that we need to change the way we consume. We need to change the way we select our politicians and hold them accountable to these goals. Because regulation and governments do make a difference. And we have examples. When we look at the world today, some people will say we have the highest number of displacement ever since the Second World War, 67 million people displaced. 23 million of them are refugees, and the rest are displaced within their own countries. We have conflicts that have been ongoing for 6, 7 years and longer, much longer than that. We have anxieties rising because of new technologies and concerns about AI and cybersecurity and the infiltration of digital and social media into every aspect of our life, the loss of privacy, what is happening to data. At the same time, the world is spending, last year, $1.73 trillion were spent on military. That's 2.2 of the GDP of the planet. So is it the right priorities that we have that we are spending 2.2% of the world on GDP, while we spend less than 10% of that on official development assistance or on humanitarian aid, which has skyrocketed. 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, the Universal Humanitarian Appeal that is coordinated by the United Nations was in the range of $4 to $5 billion. The one that was launched this year was $24 billion. That's the amount of humanitarian assistance aid needed by different UN organizations and civil society organizations. At the same time, I don't want to give you a grim picture. We are also living at a time when we have the lowest percentage of people living in extreme poverty ever. We have achieved major advancement in ensuring and providing education. Gender equality remains a big challenge, but there have been progress in many parts of the world, including at the United Nations. For the first time, in the most senior leadership in the organization, at the level of Assistant Secretary General, Under Secretary General, there is parity. And to some extent, that has never happened before. So we're trying to lead also by example. For the first time also, there's been an equal number of women and men submitted as the UN resident coordinators by the Secretary General. These are the leaders of the UN in the field, in the developing countries. Hunger. 800 million people are still hungry and they are food insecure, but that is probably the lowest number it has ever been. Life expectancy is the highest it has ever been. So there are major achievements. However, the challenges are huge, and I think the responsibility is upon all of us, individuals, universities, societies, and it's really heartening to see universities coming together, joining together with the United Nations, with young people like yourselves, who are the future, because there is much at stake in this agenda for you than for us. It is about you having the same level and standards of life as your parents have, and usually up till now, every generation enjoyed a better standard of living than their parents or their grandparents. The challenge is that this is the first generation that can end poverty. It's also the last generation that can deal with climate change. And climate change is, at the moment, not on track. Let me put it this way. We are not on track to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement of December 2015. And that means that we have to double our efforts. And looking around at what is happening in the world, you also get glimpses of hope, because climate action is proving that renewable energy is becoming cheaper, and many more societies and communities and governments are moving in that direction. Plastic waste. 2 days ago was the World Environment Day, 5 June. I don't know if you were aware of it, but the United Nations Environment Program launched a campaign, #BeatPlasticPollution, asking every person to take 3 steps to reduce their plastic waste. And I was happy to see the water that we had here was in cartons and not in plastic bottles. The plastic straws, plastic that we see in supermarkets. And you see initiatives taking hold, and I think consumers have the ability and responsibility to hold businesses accountable. I think I saw a statistic at some point that when 5p was introduced as the price of a plastic bag in supermarkets in the UK, usage of plastic bags and the appearance of plastic bags on the shores went down by 85%. Rwanda, as a country, banned plastic bags from the entire territory already a few years ago. So it is doable, I think, but we have to look at what is happening in the oceans. Tomorrow, 8 June, is World Ocean Day. We have many days, by the way, and we use these as an opportunity to reaffirm commitment to certain aspects of what is on the agenda. Every day could be the SDG day. But I think it's important, we all have a birthday, so it's like you all have one birthday, so the ocean has one day, environment has one day, but I think we have to think about how can we take that one-day commitment to more than just for that day itself. Many of you have and come here to share experiences, and I think this is actually what this meeting is about you sharing those experiences and those initiatives, because it's up to every one of us to know what we can do. I'm not in a position to tell you what you need to do. You know what you can do, you know what your responsibility is. And as we do this for the environment, let's not forget also the most vulnerable amongst us. And those could be migrants, could be refugees, could be a minority, could be people displaced because of conflict within their own country, could be different from us, ethnically, religiously, sexual orientation, or whichever way they are different. But at the bottom, we're all the same. So compassion is at the heart of societies, of democratic societies, and I think we have to think of how do we translate that to change the world for everybody at every level, no matter where they come from, what they do for a living, and ensure that the basic principle of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda is leave no one behind. So let's not leave anyone behind. And I think every one of you here, this room usually takes about 800 people. I think maybe you are 700 people here. So that's 700 people capable of making a change. The change starts with you, the society around you, universities, but also don't forget that it's important to remind also the government representatives that they have a responsibility to also continue working to achieve what they themselves committed to doing by 2030. Thank you for being here, and I hope that this is not, for those of you who are here for the first time, don't let this be your last visit to the United Nations. Come again. And if you have chance, when you're outside, take a look at some of the exhibits outside. Last week, or the week before last, was World Peacekeepers Day. I mean, I'll just give you a hint of, we talk about the UN. The UN is not just this building. The UN is not just the meetings and governments coming together to adopt resolutions, agreeing on norms and regulations. The UN is also more than 50,000 people working in the field, 110,000 peacekeepers, and if you have a chance to look at the virtual reality short film that puts you in the shoes of a peacekeeper in Central African Republic, in the DRC, or in Mali. You had a chance, you try that and see the men and women of the United Nations, of member states, who are sent to the United Nations, serving to protect the weak and to preserve peace, going to places where nobody is willing to go and nobody else is accepted as a neutral, impartial peacekeeper. In the last 70 years, which is the number of years we have had peacekeeping, 1 million men and women served in peacekeeping in 71 peacekeeping missions. There are now 14, and 3,700, more than 3,700 of them were killed in the line of duty. Killed by insurgents, killed by warring parties, killed by unexploded ordinances, kidnapped and killed, and yet you will find that member states are sending their men and women to protect the peace. So if you have a chance, have a look at the exhibit outside and bear in mind that the UN is more than just a meeting place. The UN is also working to preserve the peace, to build the peace, to mediate, to create the peace, to fight hunger, to fight, to protect refugees, to protect children, and to protect the environment. Join that fight. You don't have to be a member of the UN itself, a staff member. You can do it through your civil society, you can do it through your government, but come back to the United Nations and tell us more what we need to do and what we can do, because also we want to hear from you. Thank you for being here.